This is the Kybalion and Physics Part 5, Balancing Energy in Action. This is a direct continuation of Part 4, in which I introduced an atomic model based on the logic of the 7 laws of nature found on the mysterious Kybalion. So we're going to plug right ahead. If you haven't watched it, please watch that one or you might be lost in this one. We're going to apply that atomic model to nature. Let's start with colors. Colors and energy combine to form white. The lack of colors is black. Energy that moves in shorter, tighter waves tends to be violet or blue. Longer waves are red, and even longer waves than that are called infrared. The longer the waves, the more it can penetrate the tiny spaces between atoms and matter. Since blue has more waves and a faster frequency, it represents more outward or more masculine in this project. Since red has less waves and a slower frequency, it represents more inward or more feminine. If the foundation for all things is black and white, then color must be a product of balancing energy. Fire is the release of an atom's nucleus, regulated by balancing energy. Heat from an outside source will carry into an atom's nucleus through balancing energy. At first, it will strengthen the nucleus of that atom, causing atoms to repel each other even more, thus causing mass to expand. Think about bread. The nucleus then gets so overwhelmed that the inward parts surrounding it cannot contain it, and so the heat and light inside the nucleus get released. It easily follows a chain reaction. The inward parts that also get released attach themselves to the escaping heat and light to form smaller atoms. We see this in smoke. The fact that fire has color and vibration is proof that it is balancing energy. As explained previously, the waves in balancing energy have an inward property, which makes them more feminine. The heat and light being released through the waves get excited by the attraction, which is why fire will repel itself. Excited masculine energy repels itself. Lightning. These charges are released in veins of bright light called lightning. Lightning bolts are branches of heat and light that get held together briefly. This would imply that there is an inward force at work keeping them together. Because heat and light naturally repel themselves, lightning must have an inward property to hold that light for the brief moment when lightning strikes. When outward balancing energy releases its charge of heat and light, its inward property will look for the closest outward source, which is normally towards gravity, towards the large nucleus of light inside the Earth. In this case, the closest source does not mean the strongest source. In other words, lightning can move away from gravity to strike an object, but it has never been observed moving beyond the Earth's gravitational field. That means that lightning is still somehow affected by gravity. This is the second fact that lets us know that there is an inward feminine property at work within lightning. Lightning can move in all directions, but it is commonly observed going down towards gravity or across the sky throughout other clouds. If a cloud is producing lightning, it will not strike upwards unless there is another cloud or object above it. Lightning that gets shot upwards without a target branches out with bolts that return towards the Earth in an arc pattern, much like a tree. Balancing energy, which is caused by unbalance, will move towards a source of balance, an object, or its opposite. With only 2 rules of movement, lightning is very much ruled by chance. Let's talk about fire and electricity. Fire and electricity are both the release of heat and light from the nucleus of an atom through balancing energy. Fire occurs when atoms are split apart through heat. Like a log on a fire, the ashes show that matter becomes less dense. Electricity occurs when atoms come together. We know that by mixing water with battery acid will create electricity. When 2 or more types of atoms or molecules come together, there is a need for a release of excess heat as atoms reshuffle themselves in order to attain balance. With fire, the inward force of balancing energy is on the outside. With electricity, the inward force of balancing energy is on the inside. Magnetism. Magnetism is the result of unbalance in atoms. When their inward parts are stronger than the nuclei, the balancing energy will try to bring in heat and light into those nuclei for balance. A magnet will lose its magnetism when heat is applied to it because the atoms become balanced. The magnetic pool can attract balanced material, like metal, to expand its search for heat and light. Anywhere electricity can go, magnetism can go. The flow of inward balancing energy produces an outward side on magnets. This is the masculine side. In magnets, the outward side is called the north end. The north end of magnets repel other north-ending magnets because they are both masculine. Masculine energy repels itself. The pointer on a compass gets repelled away from the north end of a magnet. When a magnet comes together, north to south end, the balancing field expands. A compass will always point towards the flow of balancing energy, away from where it comes out, away from the north or masculine end. If a magnet is laid on top of compasses, then we can see the path of the balancing energy that the magnet is producing. Normally, the north or masculine end is painted red on magnets, although for the sake of consistency, it is painted blue here, as blue represents the masculine side of energy throughout this project. The Earth's balancing field, or electromagnetic field, comes out from the South Pole directly over Antarctica and returns through the North Pole directly over the Arctic. Since the flow of the Earth's electromagnetic field comes out of the South Pole, it means the South Pole is the true North Pole. The free end of a compass points in the direction of this flow. In other words, a compass actually points south. Scientists have already acknowledged this problem, although curiously, it is not widely known. The scientific term true north recognizes that the South Pole is actually the North Pole. Yep, I don't know why that's not taught in schools. Since a compass actually points south, it means we humans have been looking at the map of the Earth upside down for quite some time now. Antarctica is actually on the North Pole, and the North Star is actually in the southern sky. Good thing the North Star still has the name Polaris. Let's talk about the hole in the ozone layer. It was discovered that over Antarctica there was a hole in the ozone layer. Ozone is the name given to triplet oxygen atoms and thought to absorb most of the sun's ultraviolet radiation. But now that it's been explained that Antarctica is the true North Pole, it can be deduced that it is not a hole. It is where the electro part of the electromagnetic field comes out, where outward balancing energy emerges from the Earth. It's all connected, the supposed hole, the true North Pole, and the direction of the balancing field. The belief that ozone absorbs the sun's radiation may not be correct, as this project shows that the sun's radiation is being repelled by the Earth's singularity inside the core. The repelling force stretches out to where ozone exists. NASA provides these kinds of images on their website. Let's go back to batteries. Batteries have two different groups of atoms or molecules that come together to create balancing energy. For example, dried battery acid and water. When atoms or molecules come together, balancing energy is released as they rebalance themselves. The balancing energy produced must release its charge of heat and light, which makes it more masculine. This is the electrical power caused by batteries. Balancing energy will move through groups of balanced atoms, like copper, until it finds a way to become balanced, in this case releasing excess heat and light. Once it has released this charge, the energy returns as magnetic, or more inward, or feminine, so it seeks out the closest source of outward masculine energy, which is the battery itself. With batteries, the entire process is regulated and directed through this pattern. This recycling action helps expedite the balance of the atoms and molecules. All things move towards balance. A battery works just like an atom. The outward balancing energy that a battery produces must release its charge of heat and light before it can be recycled. Although the terminal posts on batteries are labeled positive and negative, they are really outward and inward, electric and magnetic, more masculine than more feminine. Once the atoms in a battery are balanced, it is considered dead. This is just a reminder that the color blue in this field represents masculine or positive, or the electro part of the electromagnetic field, including batteries. Normally red is usually designated as the positive end. A ground wire in a battery is attached to the frame of the vehicle. It is connected to a negative end. It is there to make sure that any excess heat and light going through the magnetic or negative end of the battery gets released before it recycles back to the battery. Should excess heat and light return to the battery through the negative end, it will cause the battery to overcharge or short out. A ground wire is usually covered in a green casing. Direct current. The cord that charges our appliances and devices, which is connected to a power outlet, works the same way a battery does. There are two wires inside the cord. One is outward and supplies our devices and appliances with power, releasing a charge of heat and light. This is electricity. The other is a return wire so that it can keep recycling. Let's talk about an electromagnet. It's quite easy to turn a metallic object into an electromagnet by wrapping the object with a coil of copper wire, for example, an iron nail. The wire must be connected to a battery of some type. The copper wire should be encased in a layer of insulation. If the wire is not insulated, there are a couple things that can happen. Either the object becomes a direct part of the circuit, making the coil obsolete, or there might be so much charge that the circuit shorts out. The part of the wire connected to the battery cannot be insulated so that it can allow electricity to flow through it. The coil is important because it keeps the outward balancing energy moving in an inward feminine pattern. The object in the middle of the coil will retain the inward property of balancing energy, causing the object to be magnetic, while the wire itself will continue to circulate the outward property of balancing energy, which manifests as heat. If the object in the coil is left connected to the circuit, the object will eventually heat up, losing its magnetic property because the object becomes unbalanced in an outwardly manner, overheating. Magnets lose their magnetic property when exposed to heat because the atoms become balanced. Once an object heats up, it is more masculine. An electromagnet is proof that balancing energy carries both inward feminine and outward masculine properties. When outward balancing energy, electricity, moves in a feminine pattern, like a spiral or a coil, it will cause the masculine energy to do the same thing a male sex organ does during the act of reproduction. Outward balancing energy will become excited and enhanced, releasing even more outward energy before it reaches the most inward point, before it can be inward balancing energy. In other words, the more inward outward balancing energy goes, the more its outward properties become amplified, much like a male erection. Depending on how the coil is used, it can release this excess energy as heat, like a stovetop, colorful lightning if there is a release point, like on the Tesla towers, or even a repelling force against certain metals, the same way that light surrounded by dark energy, an atom, creates a repelling force. In fact, with enough coil, the outward balancing energy can be manipulated to create a very large outward push against other similar masculine energy. This is called an electromagnetic pulse, EMP, which, as we know, damages electronic equipment. Once again, yes, I am comparing energy to sex, and I've been doing that this whole project. There is an experiment worth observing that helps illustrate how masculine energy becomes excited and enhanced. A magnet was placed in the middle of a copper coil that has a charge running through it. The charge, outward balancing energy, got excited by the inward movement and produced a repelling force against the magnet. Since the magnet placed inside the coil had nowhere to go, it started spinning. Because the magnet had nowhere to go, the repelling force intensified, becoming heat, which melted the magnet in the end result. Radiation. Radiation is the result of atoms having their nuclei stronger than the inward parts. The balancing energy that emerges emits tiny charges of outward energy. We call this radiation. Objects with radiation should balance out when exposed to inward balancing energy, or magnetism. As radiation is another form of outward balancing energy, then magnetism is also its opposite. Radioactive atoms are described as having a decay rate because the atoms have a slow leak of particles from the nuclei, much like a leaky faucet. These types of atoms are considered unstable because they can be broken down easily with heat. Radioactive atoms are used to make atomic bombs. If heat is applied to them, balancing energy will absorb it as it has nowhere else to go. The heat carried into the nuclei of these atoms causes them to be so overwhelmed that all the heat and light are released. The inward parts are also released. They immediately seek the next source of outward energy, which is usually towards gravity. Atomic bombs are the most devastating weapons humans have invented for war. They are the curse of intelligence. One of the things that can be observed in explosions is the darkness underneath the fire. As the nuclei of atoms are released, so are the inward parts. They attach themselves individually to the released heat and light, causing smaller atoms such as carbon, a dark substance. Despite inward parts being attracted to light, most of the outward energy escapes past them in a very destructive manner. Proof of inward parts comes from observing the effects of atomic explosions. For example, if a bomb is detonated in a desert, the sand turns to glass. Not only has the sand been melted, but it has acquired more inward parts, and so its mass has become more dense. Even though some of the light of a blast is recaptured to form smaller atoms, smoke, most of it escapes. Most of the inward parts will move towards gravity, towards the larger singularity inside the Earth. Let's talk about lasers. Lasers are regulated waves of balancing energy that carry tiny packets of heat and light inside each wave. We call this particles. Although the particles carried in the waves are regulated to go in one direction, the light released from the particles still goes outward in all directions. This is why it's important to wear special eye protection when working with lasers. The charges of light inside the waves can only be as big as the size of the waves. Inward balancing energy can have shallow waves, keeping very tiny packets of light in different patterns. This is how information is read as ones and zeros. If there is a particle of light inside the wave, it is a 1. If there is nothing in the wave, it's considered a 0. Inward balancing energy can be stored in the spaces between atoms. As we know, some digital information storage devices are magnetic, which must be constantly kept cool so they do not overheat. Crystals. Because certain crystals can retain heat and keep their shape, they can retain information. Using crystals in technology is a relatively new idea that has already had many breakthroughs. All right, let's go back to the sun. The electromagnetic field of the sun, or any star or celestial body, is there to help balance out the singularity against the inward parts surrounding it. The electromagnetic field is balancing energy. Solar flares are magnificent to behold thanks to organizations like NASA that provide us with the ability to view this phenomena. Solar flares are giant arcs of heat and light that emit from the sun. As observed, solar flares do not happen at the poles, they happen at the sides of the sun, just like an electromagnetic field happens. The outward point of a flare is thicker before it returns back to the sun. Flares release large particles of heat and light which scatter away from the sun. Where the flare returns also causes the light to scatter away from the sun. It works exactly like a ground wire, expelling excess heat and light before it returns to the source. Currently, these flares are labeled as plasma, yet they behave exactly like electricity. One of the more intriguing mysteries of solar flares is that in the arc of the flare, giant balls of light will fall back towards the sun, as if matter was being created. Many different types of atoms have been detected on the surface of the sun. This is no surprise, as there are countless inward parts interacting with light. Light and dark form atoms, simple and complex, which get split up again. All this happens on the surface, not the inside of the sun. Solar flares remain a mystery indeed, but at least through this perspective, there are more answers than questions. Finally, a black hole, which I call a black body, thanks to Max Planck. A black hole is one giant magnetic atom. Again, if space were gray, we would see a gargantuan black body. There is such a large body in the center of every galaxy. Just like an atom, its nucleus is made of heat and light, surrounded by many inward parts. Despite its massive size, its nucleus remains relatively small, but bigger than what stars would have because smaller bodies orbit larger ones. The immense weight inside such a large body is caused by the massive amounts of inward parts pushing against the nucleus. The reason the nucleus will not collapse despite the pressures of so many inward parts around it is because masculine and feminine energy come together to create, not destroy. The balancing energy produced would try to help by bringing in heat and light into the nucleus. This is the definition of magnetism. It's already known that black holes, or more appropriately named black bodies, suck in heat and light. This is the reason why. As above, so below means that the microcosm of atoms is just like the rest of the universe. A star is a smaller version of a black hole spinning and or moving fast enough to ignite. Planets and moons are smaller versions of stars which are not spinning fast enough to ignite, so they hold their mass, which allows for different variations of planetary bodies. Atoms are tiny versions of black holes, which are all black bodies. The laws that govern energy are the same for everything else. They are the laws of nature. I know this was a long video, so I didn't really have time to add any commentary. But stick around for part 6, in which I will be debunking quantum physics, which I'm very much looking forward to. Thank you so much for your time.